Welcome back to the Cardinal Newman Society Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Murphy, and we are thrilled with our founder, Patrick Reilly, joining us in really an enthralling conversation about Cardinal Newman, the newest doctor of the church. Patrick, welcome back to the program. I'm going to start right off. Tell us from the start, Patrick, a little bit about John Henry Newman, for those people that don't know who he is. Mm-hmm. And then how did such a humble priest become a doctor of the church? How does that work?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics, so thank you so much for having me. When we started the Cardinal Newman Society, I knew of his idea of a university. I knew some of his writings on education, and that's why he was declared patron of the Cardinal Newman Society. But over the years, it's been over 30 years of doing this, I've gotten to know Newman so much better, and I really do believe he is the perfect saint for our times and very important intercessor, given the things that are going on right now. Everything from the Charlie Kirk shooting to the massive unrest and the loss of faith of so many Catholics, especially young Catholics, and the rise of the renewal of Catholic education. I mean, just so many things go right to the heart of what Newman was all about. So who was he? Newman lived during the 19th century. I mean, he was born in 1801 and died at the end of the century. So he was very much of a Victorian English Catholic ultimately, but originally an Anglican. Right. And as we know from our history books, at that point, England had gone through more than 3 centuries of the suppression of the Catholic Church, of the declaration of the King of England or Queen of England being the head of the Catholic Church in England, and claiming to be the equivalent to the Pope. And so it was a Protestant church. And Newman grew up initially an evangelical Christian, became more and more entrenched in the Anglican Church, going to Oxford University and studying there, became a very prominent figure in the Oxford University, but in the Anglican Church, and was a big leader in something called the Oxford Movement, mm-hmm. which was an effort to basically make the Anglican Church once again more Catholic in many respects, not so much doctrinally, but in many other respects. And it was a very influential movement, and he became very prominent in England. So he had a prominent position and was destined to go on to be a great leader within the country. But in his studies of history, his studies particularly of the past heresies in the church, he realized that in fact the Anglican Church was Protestant, that it had separated from the one true church, and he ended up becoming Catholic in 1845, was received into the church by Blessed Dominic Barberi, a Italian Passionist priest who was illegally bringing people into the church in England as a missionary. It was missionary territory at that time. Mm-hmm. And so we really have to consider the circumstances. Context, yes. And when we Americans think, the church could never be suppressed, I mean, this is what happened for more than 3 centuries. And Newman lived through a very interesting time. I mean, he did live through the return of the church to England. It was in the 1850s that the Crown allowed the church to reestablish the bishops, and it was in, I think, 1873 that they opened the first Catholic seminary. And he, on both occasions, he spoke to the bishops and delivered some very powerful sermons, which we can talk about. Mm-hmm. And so he became a very influential Catholic. And it was an interesting life because once he converted, the Anglicans were greatly disappointed in him, and many of them would not speak to him, and there was a lot of anti-Catholic
sentiment. Wasn't just not speaking. I mean, they were outwardly mocking, right? I mean, it was to be a Catholic was the ultimate derision.
Right. It was to go back to something that the country nearly as a whole had rejected, and there were very few Catholics left, active Catholics at the time of Newman, and And then at the same time, the Catholics didn't trust him, right? They saw him as an Anglican. They weren't sure that he was truly a faithful Catholic. And he was this great intellectual who couldn't help but dive into all of the controversies of the time. But there was a lot of distrust of him on both sides.
Yeah.
And it was only near the end of his life when Pope Leo named Newman a cardinal that it really established that, okay, in fact, Newman was right about many things, and that the church had great respect for him, and it really elevated him to that status. And for him to come out of that kind of a uncertain situation, a very difficult time, he had a very difficult life in many respects, to now being named the 38th doctor of the church, meaning that he is one of those great esteemed theologians, philosophers who the Catholic Church, all Catholic lay people, clergy, should be looking to him as one of the leading guides in helping us to understand our faith.
When Newman converted and he became Catholic, there was a little bit of time before he became accepted as a priest first, correct? Like there was a few years before he was a priest.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it was pretty quick after he converted. The Pope asked him to go to Rome and to study for the priesthood, and so that took some time. But yeah, it was fairly fast that he became a priest, and then had to really figure out where he fit into this church that he had not grown up in, and that led him to establish the oratories of St. Philip Neri in England. To bring in this oratory structure that was something very unique that St. Philip Neri had established in Italy, in Rome, and to bring that to England. And he established the Birmingham Oratory in Birmingham, England, and then very quickly, the year later, established another oratory in London, the Brompton Oratory.
And so I think it's like 30 years or so from the priesthood to being named a cardinal.
Yes. Yes.
And so that amount of time had to pass. Now, in that amount of time, how did Newman settle in? Where did he find himself in the church?
He saw himself primarily as a pastor, and his motto was "Heart speaks to heart." That cor ad cor loquitur. That he was very much about personal spiritual guidance, and this is something that dominated his life, and in fact very much was part of his vision for Catholic education, this understanding that it's not just about this distant teacher-student relationship, but that the teacher needs to be a pastoral guide and influence on young people if it's truly to be a Catholic education.
Newman has so much significance in education today. But when you look at it, if you're somebody that's aren't familiar with Cardinal Newman at all, when did education take over the bulk of his identity?
Yeah, well, I think it primarily came out of his pastoral influence, but he was very well educated, was very smart, very Thomistic, very philosophical, and knew a lot about many subjects. And it was very shortly after he converted that the bishops of Ireland asked him to establish a university in Ireland. And so it was to be the only Catholic university in Ireland sponsored by the church. And he undertook that project with great zeal, and as part of that delivered a series of lectures explaining exactly what it was that he was proposing to do with this institution, and that is what has become his very famous book, Idea of a University, the collection of those lectures. Unfortunately, there was a lot of disagreement among the bishops and between him and the bishops as to what that university should be. And there was a lot of the same type of discussions we have today regarding higher education about to what extent should it be career focused, to what extent should it be focused on academics, to what extent should there be a formational aspect of it, a spiritual aspect of it. There were some of the bishops who thought, well, yes, it's a Catholic university. Yes, it's sponsored by the church, but we shouldn't be so focused on spiritual development.
And Newman's vision of that was different or novel, correct?
Was very different, yes. And he was responding. He basically built his model off the Oxford University that he had experienced, but in correcting all of its flaws. The greatest of which was that when the Anglicans, basically stole it from the Catholic Church, many things changed there, including, increasingly moving away from the pastoral purpose of the Catholic University, forming the young person in mind, body, and soul. And so he was very attentive to that, and that all comes out in his idea of a university. But unfortunately, that project lasted, it was a couple years. It was falling apart, and he ended up going back to England quite unhappy, but then established the oratory school built out of his oratory in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And that oratory school he worked with for the rest of his life. It was elementary, secondary school, boarding school. And he was very devoted to working directly with the students, meeting with the parents, providing the pastoral guidance, as well as ensuring the strong intellectual formation.
Yeah, so we have to make sure that we make people understand that because it didn't succeed in Ireland, wasn't that his ideas of what is a true university failed. It's that individual location type failed, right?
Right.
And there's a difference because I think so many people want to write Newman off with that failure.
Yeah, which is obviously a great mistake, because the failure was not his. It was others who rejected his vision. But his vision, I mean, it's incredible. Coming from a failed project, essentially, that it lit the world on fire. I mean, when those were published, when his idea of university was published, it was immediately recognized as an incredibly important work. And even today, it's amazing to me, and both amusing and confounding, how leaders of Harvard University, or other Ivy League institutions, or other people will constantly try to fit their education into Newman's idea of university. And there are aspects, of course, that they can latch onto, but
it's the same thing, the Cardinal Newman Society. I mean, when we are doing, we're doing what we're doing, we have Cardinal Newman so, fully displayed and referring to him as our patron. People like to position Newman as something other than what we're fighting against. What are the core elements that are present in Newman's idea of a university that we still uphold and strive for today in Newman Guide recommended colleges?
Yeah, the first thing is that he literally said that a secular university cannot be what it claims to be if there be a God. He was quite clear that a secular university is not simply a lesser institution. Today, many people would say it's a greater institution, right? Well,
right.
The secular institution is neutral on issues, but Newman's idea, or the Catholic university, is somehow lesser because it's beholden to the truths of Catholic faith. But Newman would say actually exactly the opposite. If a university, or frankly, this goes for an elementary or secondary school as well, if education rejects any branch of truth, any branch of knowledge, then it's clearly biased in some way and preventing young people from studying what they ought to be studying and be available to them. And so theology, the study of God, however you come at it, whatever religion you are, theology is the highest of the sciences. It goes beyond and above anything else that we can study about the natural world. And it's one branch. There are other branches of knowledge that are worthy of study. But if you reject that branch of knowledge, how can you call yourself a genuine university?
Yeah, how can you give a full education, right? I mean, and if Newman, the thing is, and how have we come that far in that amount of time, Patrick, where you, by taking that out, show forth your own bias, in a sense? I mean,
It's
the
amazing
secular,
how it's been turned.
yeah, in other words, and then call that better.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
You're forbidden from entering into an entire branch of knowledge.
right.
Right.
And that somehow is better by your omitting that.
Right, right. And that was only the first of his reasons why he said that a secular institution is not a full and even true academic institution. The second thing he said was that in the other branches of knowledge, we could call them the secular branches of knowledge, whether it's science or medicine or law or history or anything else, to exclude the knowledge of divine revelation and how it enters into every other subject area that we can study is, again, a bias that prevents students from entering into the very first principles of every branch of knowledge. I mean, you can study math, right? You can study the concepts of math. You can study how it works. But if you don't understand that it's the order of the world as God created it and that it enters into everything, and there's a reason for that, and that this sheds a light into God's understanding and God's logic and God's order, you're missing a very fundamental part. To say you're a mathematician, but you don't understand the first principles of mathematics is frankly, not truthful.
See, that's what I think about since Newman making this argument until today. In the few, 100-some plus years that we've had or whatever since then. Now you're talking about somebody that said, you actually have it wrong, that the secular pursuit without the theological pursuit is not a full knowledge. He's saying that a true Catholic education, a full education, includes all of that.
That's right.
Patrick, to this day, people don't get that. I mean, even within the church, even within, Catholicity, as Catholic Church as a whole, there are many organizations that will shy away from that as if that's something of an embarrassment, right? The theological aspect is, we can do that, but that's only for the theology majors.
Right. And a lot of it comes out of the Enlightenment thinking, the idea that that faith is not certain knowledge and therefore needs to be excluded from the branches of knowledge and doesn't carry the same weight. And so it was literally a denigration of faith as not being knowledge that should be studied except on your own, sort of on the side, as something that might be privately important to you, but shouldn't even be carried into your life. And this is something that Newman strongly worked against, that whole concept. And then the third thing he said, on top of all of that, there is no pursuit that you can undertake in this life that is not elevated by grace. And so a Catholic education where students are imbued with grace through the sacraments, through prayer, and through the church, just through the teaching of the church and through the access of the clergy and all the other aspects of it, the grace that comes with that elevates the education and literally can elevate the mind to higher things. And so, yes, you can go to a secular institution. Yes, you can get what we call a secular education, which is literally saying we're refusing to consider this whole other aspect of life.
Right.
And you can possibly get that outside we have our CCD programs and we have all these things that are supposed to, encourage a faith life, even though you're not getting that within your
to provide that supplement if you don't get it elsewhere.
Right. And so the two are very much separated. But the problem is that the education itself is not a grace moment in which you are able to contemplate the things of this world in light of the things of God. And that's what Catholics are called to do. And it's such a greater experience. It's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. But when you go to one of these schools or colleges and you see what's going on there and the environment and the entire approach to knowledge and to understanding, it's just different because they have that opportunity to incorporate and integrate everything together.
One of my favorite things about Newman is his quote about mission, definite service.
Yes.
The reason I love that so much is because I think every young person in the world should hear that quote. Because what he says, and I don't know if you have it down word for word, but that God has chosen you specifically and given you a mission.
Yes, here. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me, which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. It's much longer than that, but
I mean, that just to say that even slower, I have my mission.
yes,
I have a mission that God has given to me and not to another person. The thing that I think young people need to hear is that they have these gifts, right? Even if they don't know them themselves. I hear a lot of young people, I don't really have a special gift. I don't know what it is, right? Well, what's the key to understanding what your gifts are is to be what you just said, in a state of grace.
Right.
Put yourself in a state of grace, right?
That's right.
Because that's the life of God working within you. When we think about the Annunciation, the angel comes to Mary and says, "Hail, full of grace."
Mm-hmm.
And she goes on to say, "How shall this be?" Mary only inquires under the power of that grace, right? This is what a student should do. Mm-hmm. Under the power of grace, inquire.
Right. And that's the other great thing about Newman, I think, is his humility. It's incredible. I mean, one of the most brilliant people who probably lived. I mean, He just had a great mind, great education, and as an Anglican and then as a Catholic, rose immediately to the top of the national conversation on various issues. And yet he was very, very humble. And I think that's an essential aspect of the Catholic education, is the humility of understanding that it's not about acquiring knowledge like we acquire possessions in order to gain greater power over the world. And you hear that a lot in public education and secular education, this idea of we need to empower our students in order to better control the world.
Manipulate things, sure.
Right. And that can be said in a well-intentioned way, but it's all about kind of becoming more powerful, right? Catholic education ought to be more about the humility of understanding that and the gratitude that everything we learn is a gift from God, and it's a window into something that we will never fully understand. Aquinas tells us that even when we go to heaven, we will never have full understanding, of everything in God's mind, right? We don't know, but and so, we should be so grateful for even that glimpse into some kind of understanding of our Creator, of the one from whom everything comes and everything returns to, and everything belongs. And so having that sense, like Mary did, of, sort of, you're asking me to do this. Well, what else would I do? It probably sounded crazy to her, but what else would I do but obey my Lord and my God? And having that humility requires supernatural grace, because we tend to be prideful.
Self-aggrandizement, sure. Yeah, you know what else though? I think one of the ways that expresses his humility is lead kindly light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he goes to Rome. He sees it as this beautiful place, right? And then he actually is sick while he's there, and then he recovers, gets on a boat, and there's no wind.
Right.
No wind. And then, so what does he do? He writes this poem, and in the poem, he doesn't ask God, just, do X for me. He just says, what? Lead me one step at a time.
Right. Yeah. That was one of his worst times of his life. So that goes all the way back to when he was at Oxford University. He was a student. He was a very good student. However, because of anxiety, he ended up not doing very well on his exams. Still, because they recognize
students should take note of that.
Yes.
Right. I mean, this is a saint.
Happen to the best of us.
This is a saint they can identify with, right?
Sure. Yes. Absolutely. I think he would be great to pray for intercession when taking an exam, given that experience. So he had, and then because they recognized his great wisdom and intelligence, he was still named a tutor at Oriel College, which at the time was considered the best academic college at Oxford University. And it was really his dream. I mean, he was finally exactly where he wanted to be, was doing what he loved. But here comes the same theme that ran all through his life. He insisted on being a pastor to the students as well as helping them with their studies. And there was a lot of resistance to that, and there was a feeling that he was doing too much to integrate spirituality with the academic life, and he was basically fired. He was asked to leave as tutor and lost that position, and that was devastating to him. So at the time that this Lead Kindly Light, when he wrote that poem, he was just devastated, went across the Mediterranean with some friends, basically get away, figure things out, went to Rome, where he writes about the Antichrist. At that point, he was not at all favorable toward Catholics.
But he made a key mistake. He prayed that God would show him the light, right?
Yes.
And now if you look at what happened to his life from that moment to today,
yes,
him becoming a doctor of the church, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
Right?
So so that Lead Kindly Light is, for those who don't know, is a very famous poem that he wrote, as you said, about, lead me step by step. I don't even need to see the next step. Right. Just guide me to the next thing. Oh, yes. Amazing humility.
That's a tough prayer to pray today. When I say that humility, when you say, God, don't show me the way, just lead me one step. I'd be like, no, what do you mean? No, that's not the way to.
He had no idea what he's going to do. And then he comes back to Oxford University, ends up becoming a national celebrity, basically, because of the Oxford movement, which began, right around that time. But do you know the name of that poem? It's not actually Lead Kindly Light.
Is it Definite Service?
No, the name of that poem is Pillar of the Cloud.
Pillar of the Cloud, which is...
And I love pointing that out, right? Yeah, because in the book of Exodus, the
Pillar
Israelites...
of cloud by day, and I call him a fire by night.
Exactly, which is God, right? And so I love using that as a great sort of visual example of education, because imagine the Israelites there with this pillar of cloud leading them through the desert, and to just have the opportunity to peer even an inch into that pillar of cloud, the power of God, right? Must have been such an amazing, incredible experience. They couldn't enter into it, right? They knew they would die if they saw the face of God, right? You hear that all through the book of Exodus. But to simply be able to peer a little bit into that, the gratitude that they must have felt and the humility they must have felt before that pillar of cloud, to me, that's how education is, right? To just have that chance to enter an inch into an understanding of God's order and God's beauty and goodness and truth is incredible. And that's how we should approach Catholic education.
And to be led by the Shekinah glory of God, where that cloud leads you to where you're going to go. It's the same thing. The whole poem is such an expression of where he was, right?
That's right.
Hey, God, just lead me. I have always been in charge, but I'm going to ask you to lead me one step at a time. And then think about what happened in his life to this day. Then he becomes a priest, he becomes a cardinal, he becomes blessed in 2010, he becomes a saint in 2019, he becomes a doctor of the church in 2025. When you ask with humility, look what happens in your life. When God takes control of your life, as he did then, by leading the Israelites through the wanderings of the desert, this is what happens.
Right. And I think doctor is even just the beginning. I really do believe that. I believe Newman, as I said earlier, I think the intercession of Newman is going to be so powerful in our time. And I think people learning his example, not just of humility, not just of his vision of education, but understanding his whole approach to the world that we're in right now, which is something that he wrote a lot about just the dangers of the kind of world that we're entering into in this time.
So give me a peek into that, Patrick. What do you mean? He wrote about the dangers that we're experiencing today. Give me an example of some of those.
I'd like to talk about two different sermons. And in fact, if anyone wants to, we point to a number of these very important documents on our website at cardinalnewmansociety.org, and we just really increased our commentary and our other
library.
Right, our other resources on Newman, knowing that he was going to be named a doctor of the church. And so we're very excited about that. So go to cardinalnewmansociety.org to learn more about this. But the two sermons I want to highlight, the one he delivered in 1851. So he just converted in 1845, became Catholic, was received into the church. And then in 1851, the crown had allowed the church to reestablish itself in England. And so he spoke at the very first synod of bishops, of English bishops in Birmingham, and delivered a very famous sermon titled The Second Spring. And there he talked about the fact that he basically used the metaphor of spring in saying that in nature, we have these cycles of life and death and things come back, but human things don't work that way. Human things always tend toward dissolution, he said. They die. Things crumble.
Right.
Every great, amazing thing that we do, every great conqueror, every great bishop or pope, everything we do tends to dissolve, and we have to keep renewing it by our human activity and by our devotion to God. And so that's what happened in England, right? I mean, thanks to human failings, the church had been suppressed, and all because a king wanted basically to enter into adultery, right? And so for 3 centuries, they had gone through this. They had gone through terrible persecution. They had a number of martyrs, a number of priests and bishops who had been killed, and others chased out of the church. All the church property was seized and became Anglican, or was basically allowed to just crumble. All the old monasteries, all the wealth of the church was taken by the crown. And yet, what happens? Here the church is coming back. And he said, there can be no explanation to this that's human. There have been a lot of witnesses, a lot of people who have tried to keep the faith alive in England, but ultimately this is a miracle. This is a miracle of God. So that was his idea of the second spring.
And if anybody knew about the hesitancy or the denial of the church, it would be him. I mean, the fact that they've suppressed it for so long.
Right.
I don't think we quite understand the context of what you're talking about, Patrick, because in the United States, we don't know what that means, right? I mean, to have that kind of vitriol for the church that you eliminated.
Right.
And then it has a new birth.
There's such a anti-communist, right, sense in the United States, because we went through the whole Cold War and we saw what happened in the Soviet Union with the suppression of the church and all of these other things. That was England. I mean, that's what happened there for different reasons and in a different sense, but it really was very much the same, that for Catholics, religion was completely suppressed, and they weren't allowed to practice and weren't allowed to celebrate the sacraments, and didn't have these opportunities that they should have been able to have. And many Catholics from England fled to France, to Spain, to other places where they could live and practice their faith. And so for this to happen, he understood this was a miracle of God, and he understood that God was in charge. And I think that in itself is a very important lesson for us to understand at a time when we're going through a very secular period in the United States, and we're dealing with issues of religious freedom and trying to fight for that. England is back to dealing with some real serious issues of questions of religious freedom, particularly for Catholics and for people who are pro-life and all of those issues. So I think that speaks to us very well. And then the other sermon that I think is even more important for us to consider was called Infidelity of the Day. And it was a sermon that he delivered at the opening of the first seminary in Birmingham in 1873.
Okay.
And in that, this was, again, more than 3 centuries, The church is coming back. It's opening of the first seminary. It was a day for celebration. It was a day for joy. And he gave a very somber speech. And he basically said, look, this is a day for joy. We should rejoice, but we should also be well prepared and well aware of what we're entering into. And there were 2 points that he made. Number one, that the return of the church, the rise of the church in a country that has been so anti-Catholic for so long and still is in many respects, is only going to draw increasing attention to us, and it's going to draw a lot of hatred and a lot of anger. I kind of see that, like, we just had the situation with the Charlie Kirk shooting and the Annunciation Church shooting, where someone just killed all these children at Mass, school children, and so many other situations like that. I see that we may be in that kind of a situation, that in fact there are things that are ascending. There are things that are starting to move in the right direction. We're finally getting a handle on the craziness of the gender ideology, and we're finally, I think, especially in the Catholic Church, recovering and renewing our faith and our fidelity and our institutions that had fallen so far away, which is exactly what the work of the Cardinal Newman Society has been. And as that happens, there are going to be these storms. And so going back to the second spring, he also made this warning. He said, look, yes, this is a second spring. Yes, and when we think of springtime, we think of flowers and sunshine and the summer's coming.
Right.
But in spring, it's also the time when we have the most severe storms, right? And we can have very dangerous storms. And those sunny days come only after some pretty rough times. And so he was warning the priests and the bishops in England at that time, that was in 1851, that look, we could be in for some trouble. And then again in 1873, he's saying, be careful. The other thing he said, however, is there's even a bigger issue, and that is that we are entering an age that the church has never, ever faced before. And it's more than 2,000 years.
Which is,
And that is an age of, when he said, that is simply irreligious. He said, we are entering this age of infidelity. If I could just read one quote from it, because I think it's so amazing. He says, I know that all times are perilous. Still, I think that the trials which lie before us are such as would appall and make dizzy even such courageous hearts as St. Athanasius, St. Gregory I, or St. Gregory VII. And they would confess that dark as the prospect of their own day was to them severally, ours has a darkness different in kind from any that has been before it. The special peril of the time before us is the spread of that plague of infidelity that the apostles and our Lord himself have predicted as the worst calamity of the last times of the church.
Right.
And at least a shadow, a typical image of the last times is coming over the world. I do not mean to presume to say that this is the last time, but that it has had the evil prerogative of being like that more terrible season when it is said that the elect themselves will be in danger of falling away. I mean, how much of that have we seen since the time of Newman? I mean, he certainly knew exactly what was coming. We've seen great infidelity in the church. We've seen apostasy. We've seen the scandals within the priesthood. We've seen the scandals even among bishops. And we've seen a certain infidelity which ranges either from outright dissent and heresy in some cases to sort of this general malaise of just simply not living our life and putting it in this separate corner. And when Newman was finally named a cardinal, he gave a speech that's typically called the Biglietto speech, because it was when he received the cap of the cardinal, right? And he said at that time, he said, my life's mission when he talked about, I have my mission.
Yes.
He described his life's mission as fighting liberalism in education. And he described that as, he said, to one great mischief I from the first opposed myself, the spirit of liberalism in religion. Never did the Holy Church need champions against it more sorely than now, when alas, it is an error overspreading as a snare the whole earth. Liberalism in religion is the doctrine that there is no positive truth in religion, but that one creed is as good as another, and this is the teaching which is gaining substance and force daily. And so here he was basically, he went from this argument that education cannot exclude the truths of the faith, and that the truths of the faith should not only be a subject that is taught, but in fact should be integrated into everything that we study, and not even into what we study, but into the entire formation of the student,
activities, everything,
into everything.
Yeah. For the past 20 years, the Newman Guide has been the trusted hallmark of faithful Catholic higher education, helping Catholic families navigate the college search to discover those colleges that adhere to the vision cast by the newest doctor of the Universal Church and co-patron of Catholic education, St. John Henry Cardinal Newman. In just a few weeks, the latest edition of the Newman Guide will be released, and it has two important traits. Number one, for the first time ever, the 2025-2026 edition will be recommending elementary schools, secondary schools, colleges, and graduate programs. This provides Catholic families with a seamless path to a faithful Catholic education. Number two, by popular demand, the Newman Guide is returning to a print product as well as a digital e-version. The print product will be digest-sized for easier access and portability. As we come upon the holiday season, remember that education is a task of love. Using and sharing the Newman Guide can literally impact a child's salvation. Go to cardinalnewmansociety.org to stay informed. That's Cardinal Newman, Newman, society.org. For those people who don't know, what does it mean to be a doctor of the church? I mean, there's only 38. And we hope that there's a few more in heaven than just 38, right? So what does that mean? What does it mean to the average Catholic that now Cardinal Newman is a doctor of the church?
It's basically a designation that this is one of the many. I mean, they're right with the hundreds of saints, right? Who every one of them we should emulate, and many great scholars of the church, many great theologians, philosophers, scientists, other people within the church who are worthy of study. These are the 38 that a Christian wanting to live a good Christian life and have a full and true understanding of the Catholic faith ought to study, and the church is holding them up in a very special way. So it's quite an amazing honor for anybody to be named a doctor of the church. I mean, this is Thomas Aquinas, and this is Saint Therese, and this is, the great Saint Augustine. I mean, these are the people who, to be Catholic and to not know some fundamental aspects of their teaching is to miss out on some pretty clear things that really every Catholic should know.
On our last conversation, Patrick, you talked about Newman fighting against liberalism. I want to just define that a little bit and then say he experienced that in his day. Now we're fast forwarding to today, and we're seeing a manifestation of many aspects of that in education as a whole, not just in Catholic education, but in education as a whole, and the view of really forming the human person, right? So I want to distinguish too, what was the difference between kind of a Newman's vision and what he was experiencing today and what we're experiencing. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the word liberalism today is problematic. And even in his time, there was some discussion of it because there were the great liberals, the political liberals, the economic liberals, at that time, liberal was understood as someone who was supporting the free market, right? Today, we would call them conservatives in America. So it gets very confusing, right? When he talked about liberalism in religion, Probably the best words we could use today that I think would resonate with people would be relativism, moral relativism, but even more than that, secularization, or the understanding that faith somehow needs to be pushed to the side of life,
thing,
right? It's the thing you do on Sunday. And you'll hear that more and more. I mean, we just recently heard a senator who claimed that our rights don't come from God, they only come from the government, right? And you'll hear many people say, keep your faith, in your house, but don't bring it out into the public square.
Right.
And so that's something that today we're still dealing with very much. And his concern was that at the time, because of the rise of scientism, this understanding that the only thing that really matters is what can be certainly proven by the experiment and use of science and scientific method. And we're still in that, right? We're in this highly technical time that forms kind of our secular view of things, to the point where, secular just means worldly, right? And there's nothing wrong with being worldly. In fact, Catholics are very secular.
Right.
In fact, even our parish priests are called secular priests, right? A lot of people don't know that, but technically that's what they're called. But it's the secularism, this sense that the only thing that matters is what is in this world, in this physical world, and that's all that really matters. And that's a very limiting thing. And ultimately, it doesn't allow the human person to rise to even what God called humans to be.
Yeah.
And so we're actually less human in being just focused on what we can touch and feel and experience in this world.
The thing that I always worry about, even with a doctor of the church, is that people take the teachings of great saints and then distort them to their own will, to whatever, thing they want to advance. And I don't know how you can read Newman's writings, or like I said, I've listened to his going back and forth with Kingsley, who called him dishonest, and that was just the ultimate harm. Cardinal Newman didn't just answer, he answered with a barrage, right? So, how do you make sure, Patrick, that people are getting an adequate view of exactly who Newman is, and that his ideas that are then are the same today that we're seeing, and that there's not a distortion or somebody claiming Newman that shouldn't claim Newman?
Yeah, I think with Newman, it's going to be interesting, even though he, I guess among the doctors, he's the most recent to have lived, right? Even though that's the case, I think for a lot of people, his writing is not all as accessible, even perhaps as the translations of St. Augustine or some of the other writings. He was writing in English Victorian prose, and there are pages of Idea of University where I believe literally, it's an entire sentence that fills the entire page, just one sentence. And so
there was no such thing as a run-on. I can tell you that.
No, he actually had great command of language.
But
it was
I
beautiful, but
totally
it can be difficult.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. If an average person tries to pick up the idea of a university, I think they're going to look at it like the book of Leviticus.
Yep. Yeah. And so there's that, and then there's also the issue of, like, say with the idea of a university, I think you could argue, please forgive me, St. John Henry Newman, but I think you could argue that there was something of an error or a lack of clarity that a lot of people do seem to get it wrong. He does say right out front in the preface that he added when it was published, he makes it very clear what the main point of his publication is, and that is that in order to be a university must be Catholic. He says that right up front, and yet people still take bits and pieces of Idea of a University and say, oh, that's us, so we're fulfilling Newman's vision. There's one particular one that I think is rather humorous. He goes through this very long discussion of the gentleman, the person who is formed by liberal education, because he goes on and he makes a very strong case for liberal education. And there's our word liberal again. Yes. But in this case, it's a very different point. Liberal education is called liberal because it liberates from our ignorance and from our sin. If it's the old classical liberal education or old Christian classical liberal education, but so he makes this great argument for it, and then you get these people who say, "Oh, look, we do that even though we're very secular," but he says that the result of a liberal education is the gentleman. And of course, at this time, it was only males going to school, so pardon the sex-specific title, but the gentleman or the lady today, we could say. But the well-formed, able to discuss things dispassionately, able to use reason and apply it to conversation. What we would think of as kind of the educated elite, the New York Times Magazine writer or having that sense of, all right, intellectual and well-educated and
a grasp of issues, an array of issues, be able to share them. Yes,
right.
yes.
Right, which is all well and good.
Absolutely.
These are some of the good results of education. But he said, he goes on this very clear, I think, argument saying the education is not the gentleman is not the same. And a liberal education cannot elevate someone, cannot make them morally sound, cannot give them even any kind of sense of ethics, cannot help them to be the Christian that we're called to be, which is frankly even more important, right? Like if you had to dispense of the education and simply had the religion, you'd be better off, right? And so he's arguing that the Oxford type university education at the time that was very secular was creating all these gentlemen, but in some cases, I mean, the gentleman can be a monster, right?
Yeah,
and we've seen that many times in history.
And you could see how Newman, I mean, at a time when becoming more and more a polemic figure with that type of thing, right? Because now and it's the same thing. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Uh-huh. We want to produce people that are educated within a particular field, and you want to be astute at whatever that is. Right. But you don't want to somehow infringe upon it with your Catholicity.
Right. That's the idea, that somehow we're infringing. I do think sometimes people, idea of a university has to be taken from beginning to end, and it's an argument from beginning to end. And people take bits and pieces of it and abuse it.
Sure.
And like you said, that happens with so many others, but I think it's happened particularly with Newman. And so we do have to, I think the way to deal with that is to do what the Cardinal Newman Society is doing and trying to re-articulate what Newman advocated and his vision in a way that the modern listener, modern Catholic understands, without, of course, distorting Newman. And sadly, it is difficult right now for a lot of people are going to be very interested in Newman now that he's named a doctor.
Yeah.
Right. And we've already seen that since his canonization, this great interest in Newman. And there are a lot of books out there about Newman that I would not recommend. And so I think you have to be very discerning and very careful. And so we're going to keep building out that website area and try to help not only provide some of our own materials, but even recommend, look,
other
these
materials.
Would be good resources for someone who really wants to know Newman. Here are good places to go. And by exclusion, by not mentioning them, I would encourage you maybe not to jump into some of the other resources that are out there, because there was even an attempt at the time of his canonization, or I guess it was at his beatification, to try to indicate that Newman was homosexual, simply because he had some male friendships during his lifetime that were typical of Victorian area male friendships, and some of the language that he used in his letters was, today we would call it romantic, and we would be nervous about it only because, we're dealing with the issues we are today where it really falls into full romance, right? And so to simply take that without any other evidence and say, oh, there must have been some kind of sexual relationship is entirely inappropriate, and it's all been debunked. And yet, if you go on the internet, you're going to find things that people say and try to claim that. I think even on the Wikipedia page about Newman, they bring up that whole controversy, and of course they don't fully debunk it. And
let me just say, this is exactly what I mean about people kind of hijack. It's the same thing with the Bible, right? I mean, people take bits and pieces, take it out of context, and people without the knowledge of the context believe the pretext. Right. And it's the same thing that we have to do with Newman. That's why I'm excited about us doing this by doing this Newman academic dump, a library you can go in and check out. And we're not telling you how to read it. We're giving you access to it, right? Go in and check it out for yourself. And then if there's other recommendations, the one thing I want people to do with Newman is to understand, as you had said, some of his writing is difficult to access, right? Mm-hmm. So what I would do is there's many different ways you can kind of consume it today. And some of the things that he's written and other things, like you said, with his sermons or some of the poems, they give you a really good indication of where his mind is at.
That's right. Yeah, you can't go wrong with reading his sermons and his meditations. Even there, though, you do have to be careful, right? Because a good number of the sermons that have been published are from his Anglican days.
Yeah.
And there is some error within them because of he was Anglican and was trying to hold on to that tradition. All in all, you're going to get a lot of good out of those as well. But
as you said, we're given the development of he says this himself is here's a development of my thought over time.
Right.
And you start to see the changes within his own thought process, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a guy that converted, and his conversion led, lots of people to look at the Roman Catholic faith in a way that they did not before, because it was sheer derision. They didn't even give it a chance to surface. It was sheer derision, and he knew that. He knew that was going to happen. And
that's right.
And he absorbed it.
Let me give you another example of a distortion that I was just watching on YouTube. There was a discussion between two evangelicals who were really ridiculing Newman. They were not happy with him at all. Pope Leo had just announced that Newman was going to be named a doctor of the church, and so they were commenting on it. And one of the individuals was saying that Newman advocated this idea of the via media, the middle way, that we must always never go to extremes, never hot or cold, just always be lukewarm, which of course Jesus said, I'll spit you out of my mouth, right? And it's a great distortion to take that and just say that was Newman's thought and to apply it to just about anything. In fact, that was an argument that he made specifically when he was Anglican as part of the Oxford movement, to say that the Anglican Church is neither fully Protestant. He argued that it was not Protestant, that it was still the Catholic Church in one respect, but it was not the Roman Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And that we have to find a middle way between what he considered the extremism at the time of the Roman Catholic Church and the extremism of Protestantism. Mm. And like I said, what happened later on is his studies of history, he came to realize that in fact the Anglican Church was Protestant.
Right.
And that the one true church was the Catholic Church. And so he actually issued a number of retractions and had to change his views on things. But so that's just an example. I mean, so a lot of times I've heard that brought up, that Newman was an advocate of the via media, the middle way. And I've heard that in terms of education. I've heard educators say, oh, no, he wouldn't have supported, one of these radical Catholic institutions like a Newman Guide college, recommended college, right? None of those Christendom colleges or Steubenville, God forbid the charismatics, or like we just can't have any of that. That Newman would have never favored that, and they took this concept that was specifically about the state of the Anglican Church and turn it into something that supposedly Newman would have advocated. And so you have to be very careful.
Patrick, bringing this home to what the Cardinal Newman Society has strived to do from its very foundation, was not only to call attention to the misbehavior on college campuses, but then now we have really strived to edify those people in Catholic education with materials to help them do a better job of achieving the Newman Guide vision. Right? Can you just make the connection for the viewer today? What is the connection from Newman to us publishing a guide that gives them a sure sign, not just at that now, which is even greater, not just the colleges, but now we have the K through 12 and we have the graduate programs. Now families can get a Newman Guide education. What does that mean? How did we do that?
We root everything that we do, first of all, in what how the church defines Catholic education. And then Newman's vision, which I think helps to better understand and explain Catholic education. And then we've done all of this work ourselves at the Cardinal Newman Society to develop standards, the Newman Guide standards that we use to review schools, colleges, graduate programs, soon homeschool programs, and other educational programs. According to the standards. And so, there's all of that thought process gone through to explain exactly what is Catholic education, how does it work in every aspect of what it does. But what it really comes down to, and what I think it really came down to for Newman, was what does education accomplish in the student? It was, again, for him, everything was pastoral. Everything was about what is the impact on the person and how does this lead them closer to God, which is the ultimate happiness and the ultimate purpose of our lives. And that is, when we first started the Newman Guide, when we first launched the Newman Guide, we hadn't yet worked out in great detail like we have now all of the standards that we have laid out that explain specifically what it is that we're looking for. But we knew from the very beginning that for us, a Newman Guide recommended institution was one where a family could confidently send a son or daughter to one of those institutions and could be certain that there was going to be a truly Catholic formation and that young person was not going to be led astray from the faith. That, to me, is the heart of Newman education. And Newman himself, there was a prayer I have here that he used to pray himself when he started the university in Dublin. He used to pray this prayer, which I think is just, there are people who argue another distortion of Newman, that Newman was so focused on liberal education and on the academic side of things. No, he was always pastoral, ultimately pastoral. And he prayed, may I engage in them, remembering that I am a minister of Christ, remembering the worth of souls, and that I shall have to answer for the opportunities given me of benefiting those who are under my care. He understood that his own salvation, when he stands before the chair of Peter, right? When he stands before St. Peter himself, not chair of Peter, that he is going to have to
give an account,
be accountable for what he was doing and for the souls of those students. That was ultimately what was most important to him about education. And therein lies such a big, let's just say a nugget, okay? Because then all of a sudden, Patrick, activities on campus, which are throwaways for people at times. Yeah, we do that, but that's, it's really not, that's just part of our, no, that is still part of the formation, is it not? I mean, again, or the speaker who comes on and openly dissents and leaves people with the question of maybe I don't need to hold that truth of the Catholic faith and still be okay. Right.
No, that's nothing of what would have been dear to Newman.
Right. It's not just that things are formational, but it's the intention always of formation, right? So every single thing that a Catholic school or college or graduate school or any other program is doing ought to always be intentionally forming that young person to better know and love God, better know, love, and serve God. This is why we exist.
Right.
And if you are doing it for any other purpose you are stepping out of the mission of Catholic education, and you're not fulfilling your mission as well.
And see, that is in essence where I think a lot of educators go wrong, is that they want to pursue education for education's sake.
That's right.
For, as you said, for self-aggrandizement or power. I now have this mastery over this subject, and I'm going to go out and make $1 trillion, right? And every time when people do that and disintegrate, they end up unhappy.
That's right.
Even the people that the world considers to be in the ultimate position of power.
That's right.
Right? I mean, men of renown today.
Yeah.
They don't fulfill that, or don't really, they just don't see it for themselves. And I think that's where the idea of Newman really being internalized is important. And that's why I'm excited about us offering the whole retinue of the things that he has to say and do. A person can go check it out. They don't need Patrick Reilly to go do that. They don't need Kevin Murphy to do that.
Right.
They go on the Cardinal Newman Society.org site, they check it out, and they'll know what Newman had to say.
That's right. And it's so very, very important. I encourage everyone to get to know Newman better, because getting to know Newman better is a path toward getting to know God better. So it's all part of that intentionality of Catholic education and forming yourself. He is a doctor of the church, and he is a doorway to knowing Christ better.
Patrick, we have to do that. I mean, taking Newman and saying, hey, you got an hour to put Newman into a little bottle is not going to happen.
No.
So you need to come back. So we gotta cut down the time between the first visit and the second visit a lot. We got to get you a lot more on, and we got to talk about Newman some more. So would you come back and do that with us again soon?
Of course.
Okay. God bless you. Thank you, Patrick. The work that you've done as a founder of the Cardinal Newman Society is impacting souls. We see it every day here. We see the people that are on these college campuses, in the K through 12 schools now, in the graduate programs, who say, I sent my kid there and I couldn't be happier. And that would not have happened if people didn't have the directional tool of the Newman Guide. So thank you for that too.
Well, thank God.
If you'd like to learn more about how you can help promote and defend faithful Catholic education, go to cardinalnewmansociety.org. Also, if you're interested in promoting and defending faithful Catholic education wherever it is found, subscribe to the Cardinal Newman Society Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.